Hi, I'm Sarah. Welcome back to Sarah Appreciates. If you're new here, if you're returning, thank you. All right, so I want to do a little bit of different kind of thing here. I want to do a movie review, but it's also kind of an autobiographical type of thing. This movie takes on issues dealing with morbid obesity and religion and uh, absentee fathers. And I have things to say about those things because this movie is a lot like my relationship with my own father. And I want to start out by prefacing all of this and saying that when I use the word father or dad, I have a few different meanings. So I've got dad number one, dad number two, and dad number three that I've had in my life. So, first of all, who do I mean? Who am I talking about when I say this movie reminds me of my dad? Well, in some ways, all three. But in a less abstract way, more specifically, dad number two. Now, dad number one was my biological father. He and my mom were married. They had my sister. She was about 5 years old when I was born, and then they like divorced right after I was like 6 months old. I think the next time I saw him, I was two, and then after that, I was like pretty much fully grown by the time I saw him again. So he wasn't interested, and like all parents who give up their children for adoption, he had the right to not be interested. So no birthday cards, no Christmas cards, nothing. He was not interested. And I can talk about that a little bit more in the future. Let me know if that's something that interests you. But I have a lot to say about that idea too of just never knowing your kids or what's out there, or just not knowing your birth parents, or one of them. Anyway, so this movie, The Whale, stars Brendan Fraser in a fat suit. Does a lot of this got full body prosthetics. I respect that. My dad, number two, was the man who married my mother and adopted us when I was about 4.5, 5 years old. So that was daddy to me. They even changed our birth. Well, my mom was Catholic. They even changed our birth certificates. She was very anti-divorce. And she didn't want anyone to know. It was supposed to be a big secret. So he was daddy. And it even said so on our birth certificates. And our other birth certificates they had incinerated or whatever. They had it legally all changed. And we were young enough, I think, that it was like okay for me. I think my sister might have had a harder time with that. I had no memory of anybody else. I was just happy to have a dad. I was just so happy. So then he died when I was 17, about the same age as Ellie, the character Ellie in this movie, The Whale. And Ellie is played by a little redhead, Sadie Sink. So of course this all came right home to me. A lot of this looked very familiar. My dad wasn't an English teacher though. That part is different. That's more like I think that part was more like my bio dad. Anyway, my number two, my adoptive father, dad. That's usually who I'm referring to when I say my dad. So that was the dad I knew for most of my life, growing up. That's who raised me, I would say. But he was not a perfect person. I've compartmentalized a lot of this, but he was also an alcoholic. He was not as one thing I really liked about this movie is the way that they depicted this guy was not a perfect person at all by any means, and that he had done real harm in the past to real people in his that should have meant more to him, and that he went above and beyond to hurt people. And okay, so that's where we start. Is this is somebody with regrets. And there's a daughter who's very spicy. I hope I wasn't so spicy, but I was an angry teen. I was very angry. And this movie takes place over about the course of a week. And it's felt like watching the last conversation I had with my dad stretched out over the course of a week. Of course, the last conversation I had with my dad, um, I'll get into in a little bit. Okay, so uh, then there's dad number three, which is my stepdad. The dad I have now is the man my mom is married to now and has been married to for many years. And I love him. He takes great care of my mom. He even helped that tail end of raising me towards the end of my childhood. Uh, and I feel like he's been a good dad to me, like as much as I've let him be. I think that there might have been a time when I could have let him in more, but I was afraid of the whole authority figure. I don't know. I don't know. Long story short, we're just going to talk about dad number two here. Okay, so this is about John, my middle dad, my dad number two, my adopted father. So uh, I want to start this out also. Um, the Whale, well, let me just talk about the movie a little bit. The Whale is directed by Darren Aronofsky, and it stars Brendan Fraser in a fat suit. So yeah, full prosthetics. And it's got Sadie Sink, who plays his estranged daughter, kind of showing up for the first time again in a long time. Then we've got Hong Chow, and she plays his caregiver slash. I mean, why are you even there, lady? But it becomes apparent over time throughout the movie. And then there's a really good performance that just blew me away. I mean, put me in tears by Samantha Morton playing Ellie's mom, Mary. It wasn't a very long scene, but it was a good scene. Wow, 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 wow. And then Ty Simpkins played Thomas, who I could have done without the character, not the actor. Just that the character left, it felt very ham-fisted, heavy-handed. So in the movie, we see that we're stuck in one apartment. And the furthest we get from this apartment is its porch. We don't leave this apartment really, except for one brief scene on that porch. So we need to be really aware that other people come and go, and that Charlie, Brendan Fraser, in a fat suit, full prosthetics, that had to be hot. It couldn't have been comfortable. Uh, he's the centerpiece, and everything kind of circles around him. And everything that happens is happening kind of also to Charlie. Now, Charlie's been in a predicament for a while. Charlie, on his own, is very self-loathing and hates himself for life's guilt, shame. Some of it's shame. He feels disgusted with himself, and he wants to reflect that disgusting thing that is inside. And he has physically transformed into that thing he feels like, that disgusting creature that he feels that he is. And so this is not a glamorous version, it's not to depict, fat people can be healthy. This is like my dad's illness. This isn't about healthy fat people. You want a movie like that, that's fine. There's shows like, I think there was like Drop Dead Diva. I mean, there's shows that embrace the fat, like the body positivity. I get that because I struggle with my weight too. But some of my weight problems come from my dad, my adopted father. And in the way that one of the first lines Ellie speaks is, "Am I going to be fat too?" That's a concern for her, not just genetically. I think for her it's more of a genetic question. But for me it was a behavioral question because there was a time in my life when around 11 or 12, I was hanging out with the wrong kind of kids, and my parents thought maybe it'd be good for her to live with her dad for a while because my parents were divorced. And so I went to live with my dad, and before that, I was hyperactive Sarah that was off on my bike everywhere. There was a movie theater nearby. There was, I could go to the grocery store, the convenience store. Anything I wanted pretty much was right there within my reach as long as I had my bike. But my dad had moved to a place out in the country. on a little pond, and there was nothing there to do other than, well, sit on the couch, eat Doritos, watch movies. He had a VCR. That was a big thing at the time. Um, but that was it. So, Sadie Sink, I really latched onto. She's this little redhead. I mean, it was just very familiar. And she was just the spiciest. And again, I hope I wasn't as bad as she was. But I understood her really. I really did. This wanting to get at the truth and just feeling like the truth was just never quite there. Always the people around you knew the truth and they're just right within reach and they just never told you. That kind of thing. I remember that feeling. And it's very, very crazy feeling. And you feel like you have to interrogate people to get at things. Like you almost have to sneak up on them. There's a moment that she has his walker and she's leaning on it and she kind of sneaks up on this kid that she's talking to, this Thomas boy that Ty Simpkins plays. And I recognized that in myself at that age. I've told my husband multiple times, you wouldn't have liked me as a teenager because I was pretty confrontational. Anyway, there's another the caretaker performance, Hong Chao. I've worked in healthcare, so she was following rules. She must have been breaking rules to bring all of the medical equipment to him, but my dad didn't leave us anything because he had medical bills. That issue in this movie is real, and I don't want to gloss over that, but my dad died in destitution. So my dad was in the same boat as Charlie, and he was in congestive heart failure. He had emphysema. I can leave links to these things down below. I'll link to WebMD or whatever, but just know that my dad was 45 years old and when he died. And for years before that, he had been struggling with um, emphysema and congestive heart failure. He had sarcoidosis in his heart, and it was spreading to his lungs. This meant that he needed a heart transplant, but his lungs would not have allowed him to survive that kind of surgery. He didn't have strong enough lungs to get through it. So he wasn't a candidate for heart transplant. I didn't know any of that. I was 17. Nobody knew. My mom had been an ICU nurse for most of my life, and she knew some of his doctors, I think. I'm not sure what HIPAA laws were like back in the 80s, 1980s, but she seemed aware of his condition much more than me. And she would say, like, go spend the weekend with your dad, Sarah. You're not going to have him forever. And just, she knew his cardiologist and his pulmonologist. Pulmonologist? Yeah. She knew these people, like, in a work capacity. So I think she was they might have approached her at some point going, your husband, before she corrected them and said, my ex-husband. I'm not sure, but she seemed really aware that if you're seeing these doctors, you're in trouble because those doctors treated people that were like in ICU with her, people at the end of their lives, like older people and stuff like that. So my dad at age 45, he had smoked 3 packs a day for about 20 years at least. 25 years maybe. He's smoked a pack a day, or 3 packs a day, sorry, of Winston Lights. And he ate, once he left once my parents were divorced, he ate really well. I don't mean pizza. I mean, there were Doritos there all the time. There were Twinkies aplenty. But no, he would come home from work and eat things like steak and lobster with hollandaise sauce over the asparagus and just a big heaping mashed potatoes and all the gravy, everything you could want. At breakfast on Sundays, we would wake up and he would have a whole pitcher of Bloody Mary just for himself. It was just my sister and me and him. So uh, it would start with bacon and eggs and turn into sausages, and then some kind of batter would come out, and we'd have this French toast, and then other things would get battered, like this fish that he caught, and just on and on. And it would become like this Sunday, smorgasbord of just for just the three of us though. Well, my sister was a dancer and she could pack away a lot of food. She used to talk about how she could eat like a box of Twinkies and work it all off dancing. So um, for me though, I was meant to stay put and not go, not get in trouble. I wasn't out dancing. So my problem was uh, essentially what do I do? So I stayed there and I, uh, I was like 12 or so, and eventually I moved back to my mom's. And there's a whole bunch more story there to go over, but I wanted to just kind of lay that out because for a while I did struggle with my weight as a teen after I moved out of my dad's to lose that weight because I mean, eating was an event every day. It was it was definitely emotional eating too because there wasn't anything else to do, so it was attached to boredom, I think, or stress. Anytime that there was a worry or whatever, it was just eating, So that became something to do. And I think that that's important for people to understand when eating is fuel versus when eating is an event, something like it's your activity. That's different than just eating for fuel. I had to learn as an adult on my own to recognize eating as fuel versus eating as something to do, like giving myself something to do. Even cooking, if you're cooking for the wrong reason, if you're cooking because you're bored, that can lead to overeating. I have a relationship with food. I've really had to struggle with this, okay? Because I grew up that scene where Brendan Fraser, Charlie, is sitting in front of the fridge or standing in front of the fridge, and he's piling on top of the pizza. That's familiar to me. My dad did that. The pizza and at especially after dark when there were leftovers and just piling it would be not just one sandwich meat but like three kinds of sandwich meat, and it was like he was making a pizza sandwich, right? Because there would be mustard on it eventually, or sometimes horseradish, and then he would start putting other things on it like olives, and then he'd reach in and grab out some turkey that we had the other night, or I mean he would pile onto that pizza and then he would fold one piece of pizza put over the other. He would eat these things called cannibal sandwich, which if you don't know, that's like raw hamburger. Like you're too hungry to cook the meat and just right onto the bread or the cracker or whatever he was eating. So and he would grind his own beef. He had a meat grinder. Like food was a thing for him. He enjoyed watching cooking shows, but I would say, "Oh, you should be a chef because he made amazing food." And he would say, "No, no, my presentation isn't good." And he would show me the difference. Yeah, he would serve a plate of slop. It didn't look like they were looking. It was huge and just huge. It was just overflowing with all the different recipes. He didn't plate it like you would see in a restaurant. It was plated like you would expect a really fat person to eat. And I'm fat, so I can say that. It's a plate that not even I wouldn't want. I would be embarrassed if someone else saw me eat from that plate. It was just food on top of food on top of food. All the foods we're touching. Like if you're picky about that, you couldn't have eaten along with my dad. But also drinking heavily and smoking constantly. So that was his lifestyle from the time I was like 5 until I was about 12. And then in my teens, of course, I was living with my mom most of that time. But in my teens, he was getting sicker and sicker. And finally, he quit doing sodium and he quit smoking to see if he could get his lungs back in shape, I think. And his clothes, his suits, it would just hang on him like a hanger. He had lost so much weight, but I don't think he had the money to replace because all of his money went into medicine. Like all of the many pills, the prescriptions he had to take, and all of that was all expensive. And this again was back in the late 80s, 1980s. So my dad was living destitute and he was eating like crazy, but he was eating much healthier at that point. He wasn't smoking anymore, as far as I knew. And now, if I'm to believe what he said, he only drank in front of me, only when I was there. Now, I'm drinking, but I haven't had a drink since the last time we were together. Like, so you know what bothers me? So you've made an effort to only drink in front of me? I just didn't believe that. So I think he was still drinking. But he had lost so much weight. I don't think it mattered, really, honestly. At that point, I don't think that his lungs would have been any healthier at all because he was still wheezing. I could still hear it. So he died of heart failure. And he died in a manner that they found him a couple of days because he hadn't called my grandmother and she had a neighbor go check on him. So they found him a few days after he died. And from the appearance, he died before he hit the floor. He had a massive coronary event. So, huge heart attack. He didn't make it to the floor because his hands were trapped under him in such a way that it didn't look like he even tried to break his fall. Um, and I was 17. So in a way, I felt that that movie robbed us a little where he goes floating off at the end and his toes left the ground. I felt that his toes left the ground because Ellie saw him go thump on the floor really hard. And uh, I felt that that should have been. I really kind of thought they cheated us a little bit out of some truth. Maybe that would have been overkill. I don't know. But the hard truth of it is it ends in a thump. Um, the best that could have happened is if he had not gotten off the couch and just drifted off to sleep or something. Um, Nobody was with my dad. He was alone. So there was no one there to like call the ambulance or anything. And he was cooking. Uh, Interestingly enough, he every burner was on, and there was soup that had boiled off, like it was just dry. um, there was bread out that he had just taken out of the oven. Um, yeah, he was in the midst of cooking a huge dinner, so without salt. Uh, I can't. I can't help but feel like that speaks to me volumes. That's how he was found. He died doing what he loved. I'll say that. But I think that the that's one of my biggest critiques with this movie is that I feel like they didn't quite. I felt that they were showing Charlie using food as a way to hate on himself more and pile on more weight, or like he was intentionally killing himself. He's a smart man, very well educated. He knew what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he didn't want to live in that body anymore. And he didn't. He knew he was too sick to make it better. That kind of thing. Okay, like it's too late. And there comes a point where it can be. My dad was 45 when he hit the floor. Uh, no disrespect intended. He was a pretty matter of fact kind of person, anyways. I was also really upset by the way people saw him, like that Dan, the pizza man. I felt very upset that guy, that look he gave of like he offered help to someone who was very obviously not okay. And he didn't know what was wrong, but he was doing the thing or whatever you want to call it, the good thing, offering to help. And he said no, and they exchanged names. This whole relationship took place over the course of like a couple of days, probably weeks, really, because Dan had been wondering about this guy for a while, obviously, to talk to him like this. So by the time Dan finally sees him, 1,000 things must have gone through his head, and he's appalled by the fat. That's what shocked him. I mean, I just my dad was a big man, but I just thought that was dad stuff. I mean, sometimes like we had to go through the laundry, like get it ready for the laundromat or whatever. I didn't like going through his things. It was gross. But and I didn't want to do that. But like Yeah, it's gross, but to look at someone who's sick with disgust rather than some amount of like empathy or sympathy, like, oh God, you poor guy, do you need help? Like just the actual recoiling of his students when his camera finally is figured out. Uh, the man has been teaching you some of the best stuff you've, maybe ever learned. And somebody has like that tube in front of their nose and they're home. That's not someone who's getting better. That's probably someone who's like got one foot in the grave, just, and that really bothered me. What I liked was that Sadie, you know, Ellie didn't know that he was dying, that I was oblivious too. I didn't know when my dad came. He called me one day after school and said he wanted to see me, and I agreed. And we went to Big Boy, and we just had a couple of sodas. And he was really adamant. Sarah, your mother really loves you. I thought this was going to be another opportunity for us to just kind of for me to vent about my latest with my mom or whatever, latest argument. And he stopped me and was like, "No, you need to listen to me. Your mom really loves you. Like, she might love you more than anybody else will ever love you. She really loves you." And I was like, "Yeah, I know, I know." I was like, "What is this?" Like, I know, I know, like 17-year-old, I know. And no, no, she really loves you. Listen to me. And then as he was dropping me off in the driveway, he was like, "Now listen to me. I will always listen to you. You can talk to me anytime you want. I'm always listening, even if it doesn't seem like it, even if it seems impossible, no matter where you are. I will always listen if you try to talk to me." I look back on that now. He was saying goodbye. My dad was trying to say goodbye. And I was like really uncomfortable because that's not how we talked. So I was like, "Yeah, okay. All right, yeah, whatever." I was trying to get out of the car and he's like, "Hey, kiddo, hey, hey." And he's like, "Can I get a hug?" And I gave him a hug and it went a little too long. I was like, "Oh, okay, that's weird." I might have, like, I probably quit that hug before he was ready. Anyway, yeah. So Ellie's whole attitude, though, I gotta say, I went more at my bio dad with that attitude than ever did with my adopted dad. Because my adopted dad could be abusive at times, and he was a scary, scary person sometimes. I think even his own buddies were a little afraid of him. Like everybody respected him or feared him. I don't know what you call it, but yeah, he was he was a big guy, and he had played football and sports, and he had all this hunting stuff that he used to do, and he was a big guy, and he wasn't afraid to get in a fight. Even with little girls. so, so I think about that kind of self-loathing that I learned, and those kinds of eating habits that I've had to re-establish with food. A whole relationship of like, you're fuel. You're not meant to be an activity. You're meant to be fuel. Because so often in our culture, in our society, food becomes the event, right? We're having a dinner, we're having a brunch. What's for dessert? Like we have entire businesses around dessert and food, and we need to eat. You got to eat. May as well enjoy it a little, right? You got to enjoy what you have to do. Um, okay, all right, sure. But at the same time, I struggle with overeating. And this movie was definitely a reminder of that. But in a way that I felt they portrayed his self-disgust, the disgust he had for himself, and then the things that he liked about Ellie being the things that we, the audience, liked about him, and saying the same thing. Why don't you shine? Why aren't you trying to get better and make the best of it? Like all the things he wanted for Ellie, I wanted for him. I suddenly thought the best thing you can give her more than this inheritance is you being there. He could make up for all these things he might have done wrong, all these mistakes he might have gotten wrong with her. He had her whole lifetime to make up for. If he could have just been there, that's worth more than all the money. I mean, depending. But he didn't think he deserved that. So I felt that it was a movie about a very slow, painful suicide. That's what I saw. A lot like, I hate to say it, in some ways like my own dad. Not the bio dad, my adopted dad. John had lived a life doing everything the way that everybody says if you want to die young, do it like this. He did those things. He stopped doing sports. He smoked 3 packs a day. He ate and ate and ate. He drank and drank and drank. And at the end of the day, he was my whale, I guess. I mean, he would move like like Charlie in this movie. He would move slowly, like a whale moving over land. I don't know how, we didn't see him flopping or anything like that. It was more like just he couldn't walk fast. And by the time he got where he, like from the car to the whatever restaurant door, whatever, wherever we were going, he was out of breath and had to take a seat. He had congestive heart failure. He was going into heart failure for years before. He couldn't breathe right when he would get to the door. He would wheeze. His lungs weren't all right. And he would light up a cigarette. So, I mean, I had to quit smoking when I found out I had cancer. Not even, no, I should rephrase that. I quit smoking when I found out it was stage 4 cancer. There you go. I quit smoking because it was stage 4. I wasn't even going to quit smoking when I found out I had cancer. So I get it. I get what an addiction means. I understand. But I quit smoking and I did, like, I hated that, but I did it. It wasn't fun. It wasn't easy. Well, it was easier maybe than for most because I was recovering from a surgery. So I guess in that regard, it was a little easier than some habits. But at the same time, I just feel so like when I see overweight people, I get it. I get it. That's not, I'm not going to say it's not their fault, but there's got to be a certain amount of self-loathing like every time you light a cigarette. When you're that big and you're starting to pile on top of the pizza and you're standing in the dark in front of the fridge, that's not self-love. That's not self-care. That's not even eating for energy. That's eating for something to do. And I think that this movie also, the Diet Pepsi, that was crazy because I'm overweight and I drink a lot of diet soda because okay, no sugar from that. But what I really need to reevaluate is my whole diet, not just that. So yeah, uh, it starts with wanting to get better, but it feels like a mountain. And Charlie felt like he was a mountain at that point. But he had turned himself into this thing that other people wouldn't want to look at because he could no longer look at himself. He could barely look at himself shaving. Uh, I can't stress that enough, how much when I'm overweight, how much I can't stand seeing myself in the mirror, how much I can't stand looking at myself. And when I do find myself binging, I did binge a little this weekend. I was up kind of late one night by myself and I had like more than a bowl of cereal. Let's just put it that way. Uh, when I find myself in those moments, I'm not doing it because I hate myself consciously. I'm doing it because I don't care. Like I think, I just don't care. And caring about myself is a learned behavior I've had to consciously desire to do. So I think that the whale is kind of a cautionary tale like that. So be careful how much you let yourself hate on yourself because it affects everybody. If you think that you're too disgusting, this really applies to me right now. If you think you're too disgusting or too bad for others to be around or a bad influence because you suck, okay, start sucking a little less and get yourself together because what he did was he just hung on to this old pattern of self hate. And if you can't get yourself out of that, then surround yourself with people who do love you that can remind you of the reasons why you need to love yourself. Because when you hate on yourself, you're hating on them. You're hating on all the people that love you. And that's something I need to remind myself of sometimes too. And that's what this movie reminds me of is that and the religion thing. Oh, ho, ho, Holy Ghosts. I'll do that in another video, maybe. I don't know if this whole movie deserves that much, but yeah, the religion thing. Wow. Anyway, the health aspects of this movie, uh, very important. So I recommend it, but no, I won't be watching it again. It was not an enjoy. It's not a movie I enjoyed. It's a movie I that put things in perspective for me a little, but and I think that the awards that it won are well deserved. And congratulations to Brendan Fraser. He did a magnificent job. I just wish he hadn't been quite the slab that they made him into, but I understand the point they were trying to get across. Uh, the end, again, I wish they would have made a little bit more realistic just exactly what happened there, because yeah. So anyway, we'll all be able to see that in the Whale 2. Uh, Ellie dealing with all the guilt that she killed her father because she didn't know he was sick. So I can just imagine her what she must have thought the last conversation he had, and then he dropped dead. So yeah, um, that's a lot to unpack. But overall, I liked the movie. I thought it was great. I think it deserved a lot of these awards. I really, for the most part, I enjoyed most of the characters. Uh, and I really identified with Ellie a lot. So, all right. I also identified a lot with Charlie because I feel gross. I feel disgusting a lot of times. And self loathing is a thing I carry with me a lot. And I try to overcome that a lot too. So, those are my thoughts on The Whale. Have you seen this movie? What were your thoughts? Are you going to see this movie if you haven't already? I would love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want more of this kind of content. And as always, please, please, please be kind to yourself and others. Bye.